Controversy in the NBA. Legal news. Portland Trail Blazers head coach Chauncey Billups has been charged in an illegal poker operation tied to the mafia. He's been arrested this morning. In addition to that, that's not the only. Terry Rozier has also been arrested as part of a gambling inquiry.
The biggest scandal of the century has just exploded, and it's shaking the basketball world to its core. Dozens of NBA players have been dragged into the spotlight, accused of being part of a secret underground gambling network connected to organized crime. Inside a tense and overcrowded courtroom, more than 50 players are now pleading with the judge, exposing stunning details about the illegal operation that's ripped through the league like a wildfire. What they've confessed under oath isn't just revealing corruption, it's threatening to destroy the NBA's reputation once and for all. Authorities have described this case as a two-headed monster. During the official announcement, prosecutors laid out two major indictments, both rooted in large-scale fraud. One case involves a sports betting operation, while the other centers around a web of illegal gambling, specifically rigged poker games designed to cheat players out of millions. The first indictment targets 6 defendants accused of orchestrating one of the boldest sports corruption schemes seen since the rise of legalized online betting in the United States. On October 23, 2025, the entire basketball world was blindsided by what would become one of the most explosive and far-reaching scandals in NBA history. The revelations that morning sent shockwaves through professional basketball, unveiling a dark web of deceit that stretched from the bright lights of NBA arenas to the hidden corners of organized crime. This wasn't just another minor betting controversy. It was something far more sinister, far more complex, and infinitely more damaging to the integrity of a sport adored by millions around the world. That same morning, hundreds of agents from multiple agencies, HSI, the FBI, the New York Waterfront Commission, and the NYPD, executed coordinated raids on the homes of suspects who, for years, had operated with complete arrogance and a false sense of immunity. Across 9 states, from coast to coast, dozens of individuals were taken into custody in what law enforcement described as one of the most meticulously planned operations in recent memory. This investigation had been quietly building behind the scenes for more than 4 years, with agents working tirelessly to connect every thread. Now, it had finally reached its breaking point. Federal prosecutors unsealed 2 separate indictments, calling them among the most audacious acts of sports corruption ever uncovered in the post-legalization era of online betting. The accusations were staggering, the evidence overwhelming, and the people involved, household names that no one ever imagined would be linked to handcuffs and criminal charges. Between December 2022 and March 2024, investigators alleged that the defendants engaged in a massive fraud scheme by using confidential, non-public information related to NBA players and teams to place illegal bets. This inside information included critical details: when certain players would sit out future games, when they might intentionally leave early, or when they planned to claim fake injuries or illnesses. According to the indictment, they relied heavily on compromised insiders like Damon Jones and Terry Rozier and also abused personal relationships with players and coaches to obtain privileged data. But what exactly were these 2 schemes that took law enforcement years to unravel? The answer lies in understanding how 2 separate yet deeply interconnected operations were running at the same time, both designed to exploit the meteoric rise of legal sports betting in America, a market now worth over $150 billion annually. The first operation, codenamed Operation Nothing But Bet, by federal investigators, was a sophisticated insider sports betting conspiracy that capitalized on confidential NBA information. This wasn't casual gambling between friends. It was a cold, calculated system of fraud involving 6 identified defendants and at least 9 unnamed co-conspirators, including both current and former NBA players and coaches. Running from December 2022 through March 2024, this scheme targeted at least 7 NBA games involving major teams like the Charlotte Hornets, Portland Trail Blazers, Los Angeles Lakers, and Toronto Raptors. The conspirators used privileged insights into private team matters, details about injuries not yet public, lineup changes still under discussion, and even plans for players to deliberately underperform or fake early exits from games. This inside knowledge allowed them to dominate prop bets, wagers on individual player stats like total points, rebounds, or minutes played. It gave them an unfair, calculated edge that resulted in millions in illicit winnings. The group included several former professional athletes who also participated in a second, even darker enterprise. This parallel operation, called Operation Royal Flush, revolved around underground poker games that were fixed using advanced technology. These games, taking place primarily in the New York area, were secretly backed by powerful organized crime groups, the Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese crime families of La Cosa Nostra. And though the two schemes were technically separate cases, investigators discovered three overlapping defendants: Damon Jones, Eric Ernest, and Shane Henning, men who appeared in both indictments and served as the bridge between the worlds of pro basketball and organized crime. The logistics behind these operations were anything but amateur. The conspirators employed straw bettors. People used to place bets on their behalf to avoid drawing suspicion and to expand their betting capacity. These wagers were often placed through legitimate online sportsbooks such as DraftKings and FanDuel, the same companies that proudly boasted official partnerships with the NBA. The profits from these insider bets, hundreds of thousands of dollars per game and millions overall, were then funneled through a maze of financial cover-ups, including cryptocurrency exchanges, peer-to-peer payment apps, and even good old-fashioned cash, all to disguise the true origin of the funds. But as shocking as the sports betting operation was, the poker scheme exposed an even darker side of deception and technology. The second major operation, known as Operation Royal Flush, revealed a level of deception and sophistication that even seasoned investigators described as jaw-dropping. What began as an exclusive, underground poker circle for the wealthy elite and professional athletes quickly evolved into a large-scale criminal enterprise fueled by greed, manipulation, and betrayal. These games weren't just about high stakes. They were about power, influence, and control. At first glance, these poker nights seemed harmless enough. Private matches played in secret suites, luxury mansions, and hidden clubs scattered across New York and New Jersey. But beneath the surface, these gatherings were being secretly run by figures with deep connections to organized crime families. The Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese families, three of the most notorious names in the history of La Cosa Nostra, were all allegedly involved. Their goal was simple: use rigged technology to control outcomes and drain millions from both unsuspecting high rollers and professional athletes who thought they were among friends. According to the indictment, the poker games were fixed using RFID chips and micro cameras hidden inside custom poker tables. These tiny devices were capable of transmitting real-time information about the cards directly to operators behind the scenes, who would then signal preferred players or adjust gameplay accordingly. In other words, the games were rigged from the very start. Players who believed they were sitting down for a fair test of skill were, in reality, walking straight into a trap designed to make them lose, no matter how well they played. The prosecutors detailed how these operations were set up like small corporations, with assigned roles for each member. Some acted as hosts, inviting athletes, celebrities, and wealthy businessmen under the illusion of exclusivity. Others managed the technology, ensuring that the cheating tools remained undetectable. Then there were the enforcers, individuals with direct ties to organized crime, who ensured debts were paid promptly and silence was maintained. The entire setup operated like a professional business, except every dollar earned came from deceit and manipulation. Among the high-profile names mentioned in court documents were Damon Jones, Eric Ernest, and Shane Henning, all of whom were also central figures in the earlier betting scandal. Jones, a former NBA player and assistant coach, was accused of acting as a bridge between athletes and organized crime figures. Investigators allege that he recruited other NBA players into these underground games, reassuring them that everything was legitimate. In reality, Jones and his partners were using these players as financial bait, feeding them into a system they couldn't possibly win. The indictment revealed that several of these poker games ended violently. Players who lost hundreds of thousands of dollars and couldn't pay were allegedly threatened, assaulted, and in some cases, forced into debt agreements that tied them to criminal organizations. Some of these debts reportedly led to players fixing prop bets or leaking insider information to repay what they owed. This chilling connection between the poker tables and the sports betting ring was one of the key discoveries that ultimately helped investigators connect the dots between the two conspiracies. One particularly disturbing revelation involved a series of games held in a Manhattan penthouse in late 2023, attended by multiple current and former athletes. Authorities believe that at least one of these games was streamed secretly through encrypted channels for overseas crime bosses to monitor live. The feed allowed them to observe the gameplay, manipulate outcomes, and even communicate instructions in real time to players seated at the table. This technological setup marked a new level of sophistication that law enforcement hadn't previously encountered in gambling-related crimes. Federal agents also uncovered a mountain of digital evidence linking the operation to money laundering activities. The profits from these poker games were allegedly funneled through offshore cryptocurrency wallets and shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Singapore. These financial maneuvers not only hid the origin of the funds but also made it nearly impossible for investigators to trace where the millions in stolen money ended up. According to prosecutors, the total amount laundered through both the sports betting and poker operations exceeded $40 million. These funds were distributed among multiple defendants and their criminal associates, with portions allegedly reinvested into other illegal enterprises such as online casinos, counterfeit merchandise, and underground sports events. Investigators stated that some participants initially didn't realize they were being used as pawns in a much larger criminal scheme. Many players were lured into these games through personal friendships, unaware that the very people inviting them were conspiring against them. Over time, as debts piled up and losses became suspiciously consistent, whispers began to spread among athletes and insiders that something wasn't right. Those suspicions eventually made their way to league officials and, ultimately, to federal investigators. By early 2024, the FBI and Homeland Security had launched full-scale surveillance on several suspects, bugging vehicles, monitoring bank accounts, and even intercepting encrypted phone communications. These operations uncovered hours of incriminating conversations, including discussions about game manipulation, financial laundering, and debt enforcement through intimidation. As investigators pieced the puzzle together, the connection between the insider betting ring and the poker scam became undeniable. Three names, Jones, Ernest, and Henning, appeared repeatedly in both operations, linking professional basketball's inner circle to organized crime in a way that stunned even veteran prosecutors. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about how far corruption had reached into one of America's most beloved sports. When the indictments were finally unsealed, the scale of the betrayal became clear. Not only were players and coaches implicated, but several prominent figures within sports agencies and financial firms were also under investigation for allegedly facilitating or covering up suspicious transactions tied to these games. The NBA, facing mounting pressure, immediately issued a statement announcing full cooperation with federal authorities and promising internal disciplinary action once the criminal process concluded. The details emerging from the courtroom painted a grim picture, one of glamour, deception, and greed that nearly destroyed the very foundation of competitive sports. Operation Royal Flush didn't just expose a ring of gamblers. It unveiled a network that blurred the lines between professional athletics, organized crime, and modern technology. And as the shocking testimonies continued, it became evident that this scandal was far from over. The day of the takedown began like any other morning, but by sunrise, law enforcement agencies across the country were in full motion. After years of silent investigation, wiretaps, and undercover work, the FBI, Homeland Security, the NYPD, and the Waterfront Commission launched a coordinated operation that unfolded with military precision. Across 9 states, from California to New York, officers moved in simultaneously, executing more than 40 search warrants and arresting key suspects believed to be at the center of both the betting and poker conspiracies. Federal agents surrounded luxury homes, stormed high-end condos, and raided private clubs that had been operating under the radar for years. Some suspects were taken by surprise in the middle of the night. Others were arrested as they stepped out of their cars or offices, realizing too late that their time had run out. The FBI later revealed that the operation had been months in the making, involving extensive surveillance, financial tracing, and undercover infiltration into both illegal gambling rings. The courtroom scenes that followed were unlike anything the sports world had ever witnessed. One by one, the defendants were brought before the judge, former players, coaches, business managers, and brokers, all dressed in plain clothes, heads bowed, trying to hide from the flashing cameras and the heavy weight of public shame. Each plea hearing pulled back another layer of the scandal, revealing just how deep this network went and how many people had been profiting off insider manipulation and deceit. According to prosecutors, at least a dozen of those indicted were directly tied to the NBA, either as former athletes or as individuals with access to confidential player information. The evidence included thousands of text messages, encrypted chat logs, and suspicious betting patterns that perfectly aligned with the timing of insider tips. The FBI confirmed that some players intentionally leaked game information, such as lineup changes and injury reports, in exchange for money or forgiveness of gambling debts. As the trials progressed, some of the most shocking testimonies came from players who decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. One unnamed player, identified only as Witness X, confessed to deliberately leaving 2 games early after being promised $75,000 by one of the ring's leaders. Another witness claimed that at least 3 players from different teams had been communicating with Damon Jones, who acted as the primary link between the athletes and the gambling syndicate. Jones himself, once a respected figure in professional basketball, appeared before the court with his reputation in ruins. Prosecutors accused him of being the architect of betrayal, the man who used his influence to pull other athletes into the underworld of illegal betting and poker fraud. According to the indictment, Jones coordinated with bookies and mob-connected financiers to set up a system where players would unknowingly provide inside information that was later used to place high-value bets. Federal prosecutors didn't hold back during their presentation. They laid out years' worth of evidence: bank transfers, wire communications, betting logs, and photos of high-stakes poker tables rigged with RFID technology. They displayed text conversations where athletes discussed their availability for specific games, and even voice recordings of suspects bragging about how easy it was to beat the system with insider knowledge. The courtroom was silent as the extent of the corruption became impossible to deny. The presiding judge called the scandal a betrayal of trust on a national level, comparing it to the 1919 Black Sox scandal and the Pete Rose controversy combined. But this case, the judge emphasized, was far more dangerous because it involved organized crime and modern technology, 2 forces that made the corruption nearly invisible until it was too late. The plea deals began soon after. Some defendants admitted guilt immediately, breaking down in tears as they faced the reality of prison time and financial ruin. Others, still defiant, claimed they were unaware of the full extent of the conspiracy. But as the evidence continued to pile up, surveillance photos, secret recordings, and bank records, it became clear that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated web of deceit. The emotional testimonies from players were especially heartbreaking. Many admitted that they were trapped in debt after losing thousands in the rigged poker games, manipulated by people they once trusted. Others said they feared for their safety, pressured by mob enforcers who made it clear that walking away wasn't an option. Some even described being threatened with violence or blackmail if they refused to cooperate. The FBI's lead investigator described the entire network as a criminal ecosystem built around greed and desperation. The agency revealed that the initial tip came from within the NBA itself, an anonymous whistleblower who noticed irregular betting activity linked to a handful of players. That tip sparked the multi-agency investigation that ultimately took down the entire operation. As details continued to emerge, the NBA faced growing public outrage. Fans demanded transparency, asking how such a massive operation could have gone unnoticed for so long. The league responded swiftly, promising to review its security protocols, player conduct policies, and betting-related partnerships with major sportsbooks. In a public statement, the NBA commissioner called the scandal a painful but necessary wake-up call, vowing to restore integrity to the sport and ensure that this level of corruption never infiltrates the league again. Meanwhile, sports media went into a frenzy. Every major outlet covered the story around the clock, replaying courtroom footage and dissecting each revelation. Talk shows debated whether this was an isolated incident or a symptom of a much deeper problem within modern professional sports. Social media exploded with commentary, as fans struggled to process how some of their favorite players could be connected to organized crime and rigged gambling. In the weeks following the arrests, public confidence in the NBA took a serious hit. Sponsors paused partnerships, sportsbooks faced scrutiny, and the Players' Union announced an independent review to protect both current and future athletes from similar exploitation. What had started as whispers of suspicion had now grown into one of the darkest chapters in professional basketball history, a scandal that exposed just how easily money, greed, and power could corrode even the most prestigious institutions. But as the dust began to settle, whispers started spreading that this case might only be the beginning. Investigators hinted that additional indictments could be coming, possibly implicating more players, agents, and even figures within team management. The story, it seemed, was far from over, and the fallout was only beginning to unfold. In the weeks following the courtroom bombshell, the basketball world found itself in complete disarray. What began as a quiet federal probe had now erupted into a full-scale crisis that shook the NBA from the inside out. Teams scrambled to distance themselves from the accused players, sponsors demanded answers, and the league's once untouchable reputation for integrity was suddenly hanging by a thread. The fallout wasn't just financial, it was emotional, cultural, and deeply personal for everyone connected to the game. The NBA's official response came swiftly and decisively. Commissioner Adam Silver stepped in front of cameras at a tense press conference, his expression somber but firm. He acknowledged the magnitude of the scandal and called it a moment of reckoning for professional basketball. Silver confirmed that the league was working hand in hand with federal authorities to uncover the full extent of the corruption, promising that no player, coach, or executive will be shielded from accountability. He emphasized that restoring public trust would be the league's top priority moving forward, regardless of how uncomfortable the truth might be. Behind the scenes, the NBA launched an internal task force, a special investigative committee made up of league officials, former federal agents, and independent auditors. Their mission was to trace every questionable transaction, every communication log, and every suspicious betting pattern involving NBA personnel over the past 3 years. The committee's first step was to suspend all players and staff named in the indictments pending further review. Among them were several former standouts who had once been celebrated for their talent and leadership, now facing lifetime bans and criminal charges. The fallout wasn't confined to the NBA alone. The scandal rippled through the world of sports betting and beyond, forcing companies like DraftKings, FanDuel, and BetMGM to reevaluate their partnerships with professional leagues. These sportsbooks were suddenly under fire for allegedly failing to detect the suspicious betting activity tied to insider information. Regulators in multiple states announced plans to tighten rules around athlete wagering and insider leaks, signaling a new era of stricter oversight in the world of legalized betting. Public reaction was explosive. Fans flooded social media, expressing outrage and disbelief that so many trusted figures could have been part of something so deceitful. Online forums, podcasts, and sports shows were dominated by the story, with heated debates about who should be punished and whether the league could ever fully recover. The scandal wasn't just about the players who cheated the system. It was about the fans who felt betrayed, the teams that lost credibility, and the sport that had been tarnished by greed. Several former NBA legends also weighed in publicly, condemning the scandal and urging young players to learn from it. Charles Barkley called it the darkest moment in league history, while Magic Johnson warned that the love of money can destroy everything that makes this game beautiful. Even LeBron James, who was not connected to the case, expressed shock and frustration on social media, saying, "This isn't what we built. This isn't who we are." The weight of disappointment was shared by fans and athletes alike, united in heartbreak over the damage done to the game's integrity. As the court cases continued, prosecutors made it clear that this was only the beginning. More subpoenas were reportedly on the way, targeting individuals who may have helped facilitate the laundering of gambling profits through real estate investments and offshore accounts. Sources close to the investigation hinted that additional players, some still active in the league, could soon be facing charges. The sense of dread and uncertainty spread quickly across NBA locker rooms, with players now realizing that casual conversations, private bets, and text messages could all be subject to federal scrutiny. The league also faced pressure from the players' union, which demanded transparency and fairness in how punishments were being handled. While the union condemned all forms of corruption, it also argued that some players may have been manipulated or coerced by criminal figures. The NBA Players Association announced plans to provide legal and financial counseling to prevent future incidents, acknowledging that athletes, especially younger ones, were often vulnerable targets for gambling syndicates and predatory schemes. Amid the chaos, stories began to surface about the personal toll this scandal had taken on those involved. Families were torn apart, careers were destroyed overnight, and friendships that once defined locker rooms dissolved into bitter silence. Several defendants reportedly faced threats from the same crime families they once worked with, now fearful that cooperation with authorities could put them in danger. It was a haunting reminder that once you enter the underworld of organized gambling, there's rarely a clean way out. Meanwhile, the media frenzy showed no signs of slowing down. Networks devoted entire specials to dissecting the scandal, reconstructing timelines, and analyzing the psychology behind the downfall of once respected athletes. Documentaries were already in production, promising to expose the untold truth behind the NBA's greatest betrayal. The story became more than a sports scandal. It became a cultural moment, forcing fans to question where entertainment ends and corruption begins. But even in the chaos, there were signs of rebuilding. The NBA began implementing new technology designed to detect irregular betting patterns and insider leaks in real time. Training programs were rolled out to educate players about gambling laws, financial transparency, and online security. Franchises were required to tighten access to confidential team information, while sportsbooks introduced stronger identity verification to prevent proxy betting. These reforms marked a crucial step toward rebuilding the league's integrity, even as the shadow of the scandal still loomed large. As the months passed, the narrative began to shift. The focus turned toward lessons learned, accountability, and redemption. For every player caught in the crossfire, there were others stepping forward to restore faith in the game. Coaches emphasized character over clout, agents pushed for financial literacy programs, and fans slowly started returning to the arenas, hoping to believe again in the sport they loved. The road to recovery would be long, but the NBA had no choice but to walk it, one game, one player, and one honest effort at a time. In the end, this wasn't just a story about gambling or corruption. It was a story about trust, how easily it can be lost, how painfully it must be rebuilt, and how, even in the darkest moments, the love of the game still finds a way to survive.